when you have a little bit more perspective and maybe you've zoomed out and seen like all these different people coming from all these different backgrounds, you realize that like, oh, this newer product manager came to me and they're like, I'm so nervous about talking to the customer. Like, what do I say? Maybe I'm gonna say something wrong. I'm like getting all sweaty. And here's somebody else who's like, what? It's the customer.
Yeah.
And so like it's so easy to take our strengths for granted. And like if you really lean into it, your job turns actually kind of easy.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about the top qualities that make a great product manager. And my guest today is Sasha Friedman, who is a product manager at Amazon Web Services. He's been in PM for about 7 years and he's grown to a principal PM role, has a lot of experience managing teams, launching products from very different product lines and industries. So this is going to be really insightful to see what are his tips for what it means to be a great PM. All right, let's get started. All right, Sasha, thanks so much for joining me. It's good to see you again. I know it's been some time since we last chatted.
Yeah,
But
great to be here.
awesome, good to have you. And also, Sasha, you've been a mentor of mine during my time at AWS when I was moving from product marketing to PM. So it's just really awesome to have you back here to sort of continue to share all of your experiences. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been great to just see your career and you made it to product. That's like everybody's big hurdle to get over. And now you're at Google, which is like top of the top. So congrats.
Thank you so much. Couldn't do it without you for sure. So let's jump in. I think the first thing I want to do is to talk a little bit about you and your background. Of course, you've had about 7 years of PM experience, and you also moved from a non-traditional background, as we like to say, right? Anything but software engineering is sort of thought of as non-traditional, but I think a lot of people come from that background and would love to hear about, your journey and what helped you move into PM.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, I haven't been in product forever. I started off my career many years ago in marketing. In the early days of the internet, I read that hydrogen fuel cells were just around the corner. And so I was like, oh, I'm totally going to go through school and just join that. Let's all be green. And got out of school and found some websites that talked about that. And they're like, are you a PhD research scientist? And I'm like, no, I'm a fresh grad marketer. And they're like, nope, we don't have any jobs. So I recovered from that one and was a marketer for a number of years. But I was always kind of interested in the more technical side of things. I wasn't a scientist, I was a science fan. And so I tried to, wherever I could, get more numbers, more statistics into everything I did from the marketing standpoint. But eventually that led me to going back to school for mechanical engineering, not computer engineering. And so I had this kind of background in marketing, this kind of background in engineering, but it didn't, I had no idea about software. I had no idea about product management. I'd never heard of even a concept of like FANG before. I just was somebody going out there and doing it. And it wasn't until I had an opportunity that some company I was in was going through a product transformation that I was like, hey, I've got a customer focus. I've got this desire to not only build things, but build the right things. And I had an opportunity to transition into product. And thank goodness that I did, because it's been just a wonderful, wonderful time.
Thank you for sharing that journey. And at AWS, you've really been able to succeed because you've been there for over 5 years, went from a senior product manager to a principal. I want to now jump into what it means to be a great PM. And a big part of that is first to understand what are the different types of PMs that exist in the space. So if you can help us understand that first, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with your model that there's kind of some more standard ways of being a product manager. There's the engineering path, as you mentioned. There's also people going to getting an MBA, preferably with an engineering degree, then an MBA. Then they can go and get a job as a product manager. And those are like the more traditional paths. But then everybody else, all of us, you and me, are the folks who like at some point had this more customer focus, this more product focus, and had an opportunity to make that transition. And it's there's no right way of being a product manager. There's no one path that's better than others.
Mm-hmm.
I personally am happy that I have the background that I have, even if it took me substantially longer to get to product management, because it gives me a richer experience to draw from. And ultimately, at the end of the day, being able to pivot and be really flexible for me is one of the most important things, because politics change, customer needs change, environments change,
Mm-hmm.
technology changes. And if you're able to keep your focus on what actually matters, and that's ultimately what the human problems behind the customer needs, then that's going to drive you to have that success.
Yeah. And like you're saying, the skill sets you brought that were unique to you and set you apart, if you can maybe like share any kind of anecdotes or general advantages that you've seen because of your background that you're bringing.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just comes from experience. Like I've worked at a whole bunch of companies that maybe you read about in Fast Company, but are not around anymore.
Mm,
Like I learned the hard way that if you take your eyes off the fundamentals, like your long-term success is at risk. And
mm,
like when I say fundamentals, it's like the right product for the right people at the right price.
mm,
And like you gotta stay focused on the actual problem you're solving. So I'll give you an actual anecdote. I was basically the lead hydrodynamicist for a hydroelectric startup,
mm,
and the team was just like really intensely focused on their experiments, and like they made something work once and they tried to sell it afterwards. But the problem was that they never linked that to the actual customer demand. And so what they made was something this big, but the
mm,
only pipes available for use were this big.
mm.
And like talk about market fit. Like that's the most egregious example of ignoring what the market actually is.
That's really helpful to sort of think about it practically. Now that we have like a sense of the types of PM, right, that we want to think about, whether it's this technical software engineer, maybe they went to an MBA program and came back to PM, but that's one path. And then you have the non-technical, maybe you come from a marketing background like ourselves, or sales, customer success. There's so many various paths there, right? That's another path. How do you think you should think about maybe focusing on improving certain parts of your skill set versus really doubling down on your strengths, right? So I'm really curious to hear, like practically, let's say if you are coming from a marketing background and you have that background and skill set, ability to think about customers, competitors, market, positioning, messaging, all those kind of skill sets, and writing really effectively. Should you spend a lot of time learning to code or learning technical skill sets? And how do you manage the balancing those two things?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I feel like I get a lot. And one of the things I just wind up doing is helping advise a lot of folks on how to break into product, because it worked for me, and I think a lot of people think about product and they think, "Whoa, I'm like way not technical enough. There's no way I could do that." And I think that the the actual answer, the fact of the matter is that there are many different types of product managers, and you don't have to be technical even to be in a technical PM sort of position. Where I first learned about product as this company was transitioning was through the pragmatic marketing framework, which is, like any framework, it did its job at the time. It laid out all the like 50 different areas that surround a product. And that could be marketing, it could be events, it could be customer success, it could be data, it could be software. So understanding that like a product has a lot to it is the first really important piece. And the second is that as a society, as a culture, we are like super zeroed in on our weaknesses. Like you get a report card and you got two A's, a B, and a C, and like those A's, nobody's talking about those. You're just like, oh no, I got a C. Like, what's going on? And like B is fine. Like I would celebrate a B.
Yeah.
um, and so like also in performance reviews or all of this, like what does your boss harp on? Like that one thing that you did wrong that one time. And I don't think it really matters. Like there's another framework, Strengths Finders, that I've used, and the core concept is like, don't focus just on the weaknesses. Focus on your strengths. Focus on how you can actually use your strengths to either compensate or bolster or mitigate some of those weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
The actual framework's about how to work together in teams, but that core message of think about your superpowers, think about how good you are at some things is really helpful for people who are looking to transition to product. So, for example, when you're saying, all right, I've got a marketing background. I know the customer, I know communication, I know all of this, but like there's this whole software area that I'm just confused by. Like you can shore that up just through understanding what the software development life cycle is. Like take a Scrum class one day, a couple hours, and that'll give you the like getting over the hump of the jargon and the terminology. You don't need to code. In fact, you might not even want to be coding because your job is not to code,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And
yeah,
on that point, I think it's funny because I've seen in working with engineers as well as a PM, it's great to have clear ownership of what am I adding to the team and what is my engineer adding to the team. So, you could, in some cases, overstep and hurt their relationship if you are maybe a little too opinionated on how to build a solution and how to execute it, and not really focusing on what is the user experience we want, what is the goal here, right?
yeah, and you read that in like all the various PM books. Like your job as a PM is to define the customer and their problem. Engineering, they'll come up with the right solution. Like I pretty much every time I've forgotten that lesson and tried to define a solution, like
Yeah.
it just backfires really fast.
Right.
Like, did you think about this? Did you think about that? How does that scale? What happens with concurrent users? And I'm like, well, how about I just cross this line off and you can take it from there.
Right.
And so like that, for those of us who don't have that technical background, like it doesn't necessarily matter. Like a lot of say business analysts or data people I know have transitioned to product management because they understand user trends at scale. They can see numbers changing over time and they can dig in and make hypotheses. Well, why is this? User experience people I've helped transition to PM because they're like, oh, I got all this time spent with users and really gaining that empathy for what it is they're going through and seeing their problems. Like I can envision a better way. And so like what your strengths are going to be how you interact with the product position itself.
Yeah. No, I like that example. I think you said something that was really making me think a lot and it stood out to me, which is about spending time to think about your strengths and actually understanding why do you have these strengths? Why do they work? Like really thinking about that.
And like when you really lean into that, you'll find that they're your strengths. And so all of those things feel easy. And you're like, oh, well, whatever. They're easy. That doesn't matter. I don't need to focus on those. I don't need to worry about them because like let's say doing customer interviews, for example. That's really easy. Like I just go in there and I talk to them. But when you have a little bit more perspective and maybe have zoomed out and seen like all these different people coming from all these different backgrounds, you realize that like, oh, this newer product manager came to me and they're like, I'm so nervous about talking to the customer. Like, what do I say? Maybe I'm gonna like say something wrong. I'm like getting all sweaty. And here's somebody else who's like, what? It's the customer.
Yeah.
And so like it's so easy to take our strengths for granted. And like if you really lean into it, your job turns actually kind of easy. So I'll talk about one of my weaknesses, pricing. I'm just awful at pricing. There's value added pricing, there's like cost plus pricing, and like we need to get it just like to the bleeding edge of where they're unwilling to pay it so we can maximize profits. And I'm like, I don't want to like if I had a commission, maybe I would care about that, but like nobody's ever given me a commission.
Right.
And so being able to like know yourself and say, all right, this isn't for me. I'm going to, when I get inevitably assigned a pricing exercise, I'm going to lean on my network and understand who's good at what all throughout my team. And hopefully you have a team to work with. And it's not like, that's another problem. But like, I'm going to lean on what my strengths are. Maybe if my strength is talking directly to customers, I'll be able to, understand or meet with them and get an idea of what sort of value the product is adding to their workflow. Maybe we changed from software A to software B. We cut out 30 hours a week from our overall team in report generation because it used to be we had to do all this. You're like, all right, 30 hours. I know your team's approximately 10 people, probably such and such dollars an hour. Here's where I think it might actually be. And so by leaning into your strengths of talking to them one-on-one, you can take away that panicky feeling of like, oh no, what am I going to do? Of trying to come up with the right price and get a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, like having a base familiarity is also really helpful.
Yeah.
Is like, let's say that there's some area like event management or what live events, something like that. Like you won't necessarily get exposure to that unless you're in the right sort of company that even does live events. But once you've done something once, you're like, all right, I have a basis for how I can do that in the future. Or maybe you are working on something that all of a sudden you've got a live event. Well, what else in my personal or work life can help me make this not such a big deal? And so again, it's that self-awareness and the moving from that like panic or I'm not good enough state to something like, hey, maybe I don't know everything, but I know that I can learn and I know that I can apply what I do know to make this easier.
For the last bit of this conversation, I would love to go a little bit back and talk about your move from product marketing or just general marketing to PM and hear your ideas on what were some of the things that you did that helped you make that move.
Yeah, when people come to me and say, Sasha, I want to be a product manager, what do I do? Start thinking of your career as your product and start product managing your career because it's something that you have some control over. Like obviously we're all at the whims of the market and the jobs and where we're at. And we can't just automatically get whatever we want, but we can control how we're storytelling and how we're looking for opportunities to grow. And so you can tell a story. This is why I'm started off as a marketer. You can tell any story and spin it any way you want. The kind of classic problem that people come to me with, it's technology background, but also I tried to do something once, but then an executive shut it down. So I have no proof. And they're like, end of story, no proof, no pudding. But that's ignoring all the things that they did up until that point. And so for me, when I was trying to make this transition, I thought about like, all right, I've never been a product manager. I've never worked in software. My technical background is limited to fluid mechanics, so I can tell you how the wind works. But I'm like, all right, well, how can I take that experience, spin the story in such a way so that it's showing that I have these core product focuses of the customer and the product and the problem. And so, taking that experience in this case, I mentioned the big pipes and the little pipes. I can say, all right, well, I was working at this company and we were having trouble selling things. And so I did a deep dive into the marketplace, and so like you can take those experiences and say, oh, like using your product lingo, we performed a market fit analysis. I discovered the customer pain point. I found the differences between blah 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 and blah blah blah. And so you can take what is essentially, if you look at it objectively, is a business mistake that led to a company shutting down.
Yeah.
You say, oh, look, I was acting like a product manager.
Right. Right.
And by accruing those stories, by figuring out how to tell them, and of course, by actually doing them. Like you can't just make this up. You got to actually put in the effort, have that customer focus. Maybe you're in customer support somewhere and you like really did a deep dive into a customer problem. You brought it up with the PM team. The PM team was like, whatever, that's only one customer. And you're like, but no, like I know that this is a problem, and I know that other people are silently suffering. And you champion that, and you finally like push it over the edge, and something happens with it. Then great. That's a wonderful experience to tell. So managing yourself like a product, being able to tell that story, and then just keeping your eyes out for those opportunities, because you might not get the opportunity the first time around. I know lots of people who wanted to go PM and they just, interview after interview, there's rejected, not enough experience, not enough experience. Eventually it'll work, and it can be super painful. Like I get it. This is a rough thing, but if that's what you want to do, like keep telling that story, and somebody's going to take a bet on you, because you can't go to school for product management. Like you always have to talk somebody into giving you that first job.
Right. Wow. There's a lot of gems there, so I'm trying to figure out which one to focus on first. But I think the idea that in your current role, you're probably doing PM things, you just don't know it, and you just need to figure out what it is and how to talk about it. That's such a good point.
And it's a mindset shift. Like let's say you're in some matrix organization. There's like engineering, they're over there. There's marketing, they're over there, and there's sales, and they're over there. Like that's one way of organizing yourself, and it's the same exact business as somebody who's oriented in a product mindset, but you just don't feel the same sort of connection to the product itself. And so, like, if you change how you're thinking, changing how you're approaching, telling the story in a different way, you can totally spin that as a product experience or a product focus in some way.
Yep. That's a great one. Well, I think those are really the core things we wanted to cover today. If we missed anything else, feel free to add it in, Sasha.
Yeah, it's been great talking. I guess my message to anybody out in there who's thinking about like, oh, I want to go for it. Like, get some, just a couple of product books, read them. Know that product isn't for everybody, but if it's like super exciting, if you're like, wow, this sounds like what I want to do, instead of I want the cachet of the title or something like that, like you can do it. Like I believe in you. Focus on how to tell your story, and you got it.
Awesome. And you mentioned, reading some books. So if you have a favorite book that you want to recommend, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. The Inspired by Kagan is probably like the one to do.
Right.
I was really lucky to be living in Portland when I was, because there was like a great product scene, and I had no idea that there was a great product scene. I just went to product talks and I was like, oh, Rich Mironov's talking about it. Oh, Teresa Torres is talking again. And like these are some of these thought leaders who just really influenced me. So if you don't happen to have that, it was a really happy accident on my part. Just getting a book like Inspired by Kagan. I also really like a lot of the lean UX, lean startup methodologies. So if I had to choose two, those would probably be the ones. But at the end of the day, like just understanding that a framework, a mechanism, all of that, it's only as good as it is to help you solve the problem right in front of you. Like, I started off by talking about the pragmatic marketing framework. It's great. It's a talking point.
Yeah.
Do I think about it on a day-to-day basis? Not at all.
Right. And only by doing things do you actually become convinced that it works, or you develop a skill, right?
Yeah.
Because you can only understand it so much by reading it.
Yeah. And there's that whole doing piece. But, like if you're an aspiring product manager and you're like, well, all this sounds great, but my boss will never let me do it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but there's got to be some wiggle room where like you're taking notes on a customer call, you're a customer success person, customer whatever, and you're like, oh, I'm going to think about it, not from I got to sit here and just take notes line after line. I need to take notes trying to understand what the customer problem is, and see if I can really define what that is, and see if that helps. See if that helps you tell a story. See if it leads you somewhere.
Yeah. Love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sasha, for sharing all of those anecdotes, all of the advice, the book recommendations, motivation as well to just go and go for it. That was really helpful. Viewers, if you want to hear more things similar to this, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and let us know what other topics are interesting to you. And Sasha, thank you so much for coming here to spend some time with me and talk. So I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Awesome. Have a good one.